Under the fading light of an Arizona sunset, the sky burned with streaks of gold and crimson, brushing the horizon like a dying ember. The land stretched wide and untamed, red dust, dry grass, and far-off silhouettes of mountains standing like old guardians of time. Wind whispered through mesquite trees and over cracked earth, where wagon tracks faded into the distance. Life moved slower here, but it was never still. In this land, danger and beauty walked hand in hand. Down the dirt road leading into a small American frontier village, a single rider appeared. His dark hair was tied back with rawhide, his face marked with the sun and dust of the open plains. He rode without haste, yet his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved with constant caution. He was Apache, a man used to being watched, judged, and feared. The townsfolk called his kind many things, but few ever spoke the truth, that men like him had seen this land long before fences, guns, and gold fever claimed it. As he neared the wooden sign that read, Silver Creek, established 1872, the faint sound of a fiddle drifted from the saloon. It was Saturday evening, and the townspeople were alive with laughter and whiskey. Lamps flickered in windows, horses stamped by the hitching post, and the smell of cooked meat and dust hung heavy in the air. Yet even from a distance he could feel it, the quiet tension that always came when an Apache stepped too close to the edge of white man's comfort. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He had no rifle slung across his shoulder, no band of warriors at his side, only a small pouch of herbs and a purpose he didn't speak of. His name, whispered among his own people, meant Silent Hawk. He was a tracker, a healer, and sometimes a man haunted by things he couldn't change. In Silver Creek, few had reason to welcome him. The sheriff, an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, stood on the porch of his office chewing tobacco as he watched the rider approach. "Don't see many of your kind down here," he muttered under his breath, hand resting near his gun belt. But the Apache kept his gaze steady, dismounting slowly and leading his horse by the reins. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like someone carrying the weight of too many miles. From inside the general store, a woman stepped out, brushing flour from her apron. She couldn't have been more than 20, with a quiet strength in her eyes and a face both kind and worn from hard work. Her dress was plain but clean, her hands rough from chores. She looked at the Apache with uncertainty but not fear. Something about his stillness felt oddly calm, as if danger followed him but didn't belong to him. The man spoke softly, his voice low and even. "I need water for my horse," he said. The woman hesitated only a moment before nodding toward the trough by the well. "You can use that," he thanked her with a slight nod. Their eyes met just long enough for her to see the exhaustion beneath his calm, like someone who'd walked through too much fire and learned to hide the burns. Then she turned back toward the store. Inside, conversation murmured among townsfolk who had noticed him. Some muttered about stolen cattle, others whispered old stories of raids and ambushes. It didn't take much for suspicion to grow in a place like Silver Creek. People remembered things they'd never even seen, fueled by tales passed through campfires and whiskey breath. As the sun slipped behind the hills, the town began to change. Laughter grew louder in the saloon. Lanterns glowed in windows and the shadows deepened. Silent Hawk tied his horse and walked toward the edge of town, following the faint trail that led to the creek. He had no plans to stay the night among men who looked at him like a ghost from another world, but fate often finds us when we try hardest to be alone. Near the water, the woman from the store appeared again, this time carrying a lantern. She seemed startled to find him there, standing by the rocks as the moonlight shimmered across the slow-moving current. "You shouldn't be out here after dark," she said softly. "The sheriff gets nervous easy." He turned slightly, his voice quiet but steady. "The land is safer than the men who walk it." She didn't quite know what to make of that. "You talk strange," she said, but her tone wasn't unkind. He half smiled. "Maybe you listen different." The two stood in silence, the wind brushing through the willows. Crickets sang. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. It might have been peaceful, if not for the faint echo of hooves pounding from the direction of town. The Apache's eyes lifted first. "What is it?" she asked, following his gaze. Before he could answer, a gunshot cracked through the night. Then another. The woman gasped, clutching her lantern. "It's the saloon. Someone's fighting again." But the Apache was already moving. His steps were fast, sure, silent on the dirt path. He reached the ridge overlooking the town just as chaos broke loose. Men shouting, horses rearing, windows shattering. A small group of riders had stormed in from the south, faces covered with scarves, guns flashing in the firelight. Bandits. The Apache's hand tightened on the knife at his belt. He could have walked away. This wasn't his fight. But when he saw the woman stumble out of the general store trying to pull an older man to safety, something in him shifted. It was the same look he'd seen before, fear mixed with courage, the kind that made people do foolish, noble things. Without thinking, he leapt down the slope, moving through the shadows like a spirit of the land itself. The bandits were firing wildly, trying to break into the storehouse. A bullet struck a wagon wheel, splintering it beside the woman. She froze, her lantern falling and bursting into flame. He reached her just as one of the bandits raised his pistol. In a blur, the Apache lunged, tackling her behind a water trough. The shot rang out, missing by inches. He rose swiftly, grabbed a broken shovel from the ground and threw it with startling force. It struck the gunman's wrist, sending the weapon spinning into the dirt. The suddenness of it stunned everyone, especially her. "Stay down," he said firmly. Though his own breathing had quickened, another shot fired, grazing his shoulder. He barely flinched. Instead, he turned toward the sound, eyes burning with focus. The remaining bandits, realizing someone was fighting back, began to retreat, spurring their horses and vanishing into the darkness beyond the town's edge. When the gunfire faded, silence returned, thick and trembling. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Somewhere a horse whinnied. The sheriff and a few townsmen emerged from hiding, shouting to one another, trying to make sense of what had happened. The woman pushed herself up slowly, her eyes wide. You saved my life." The Apache said nothing for a long moment. His shoulder bled through his shirt, but he didn't seem to notice. He simply looked at her, as though unsure what to do with her words. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You didn't even know me." He turned away, wiping the blood from his arm with the back of his hand. "A life is a life," he said simply. "No one deserves to die in fear." The sheriff approached, pistol still drawn. "What in blazes happened here?" Before either of them could speak, one of the townsmen shouted, "That Apache! He was with them! I saw him near the creek before the shooting started." The accusation cut through the night like another gunshot. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd, suspicion rising once again like a poison that never truly left. The woman stepped forward quickly. "No, he saved me. He fought them off." But the sheriff's hand didn't lower. His eyes narrowed, uncertain. Maybe. Or maybe he's smarter than he looks. The Apache stayed silent, meeting the sheriff's gaze with calm defiance. He'd lived long enough to know how easily truth could drown in fear. Behind them, the flames from the fallen lantern flickered lower, painting long shadows across the dirt road. Somewhere in those shadows, the first stirrings of fate were beginning to take shape, something neither of them could yet see. And as the wind carried the last echoes of gunfire into the hills, the woman realized something she couldn't quite explain. Her life had been saved by the very man she'd been taught to fear. But in saving her, he had unknowingly set both their lives on a path that would change everything. The sheriff's voice broke the silence. "I'm taking him in until we figure this out." The Apache said nothing, only looked once more at the woman before stepping forward, surrendering his knife. The moonlight caught the edge of his wounded shoulder as he walked toward the jailhouse. And she, heart pounding, breath trembling, stood frozen in the street, realizing she'd just witnessed something that defied every rule of her world. Something told her this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The night settled heavy over Silver Creek, carrying with it the scent of gunpowder and smoke. The townspeople were slow to move, still shaken from the attack. Some began sweeping up broken glass from the saloon windows. Others whispered about the bandits who'd ridden in, and the strange twist of fate that had brought an Apache into the middle of it. But most eyes kept drifting toward the small jailhouse near the edge of town, where a lantern burned dim behind the barred window. Inside, the man they called Silent Hawk sat quietly, his hands bound, his wound slowly darkening his torn shirt. The sheriff paced by the door, boots scraping the wooden floor. He was a man who'd seen enough trouble to know not everything was as it first appeared, but he was also a man of the law, and the law in places like Silver Creek was often built more on fear than truth. He spat tobacco into a bucket and turned toward the cell. "You say you weren't part of it," he said gruffly, "but folks saw you riding in just before the attack." Hard not to connect the dots. Silent Hawk didn't look up. His voice was calm, almost weary. "If I rode with them, I wouldn't be sitting here." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. There was no arrogance in his tone, just a simple truth. Still, he wasn't ready to let the man go. Maybe. Or maybe you knew they'd come and wanted to play hero to earn yourself a pass. Seen stranger things. The Apache's eyes lifted then, sharp as a knife but steady. I don't play at saving lives. The sheriff felt a flicker of unease. There was something in the man's stillness that spoke louder than any defense could. He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and left the room. The door shut with a heavy thud, leaving only the quiet creak of the wind outside and the low hum of the lantern flame. Outside, the woman who'd been saved stood by the wooden porch rail, staring toward the jailhouse. The night air was cool, brushing against her skin, but she hardly noticed. The scene replayed in her mind again and again. The bandits, the gunfire, the way he'd moved without hesitation. She didn't even know his name, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened tonight had changed something deep within her. She heard footsteps behind her. It was the sheriff. You should head home, he said. Ain't safe hanging around after dark. I just wanted to be sure he's all right, she replied softly. He's fine, the sheriff said, though his tone was gruff. Got a shoulder wound, but it's clean. I'll have Doc come by in the morning. She nodded but didn't move. He saved my life. You saw it yourself, the sheriff sighed. Maybe he did. But this town don't trust easily. And I can't just let him walk out after what happened. She turned to face him. Then at least let him be treated. You'd do the same for anyone else. The sheriff hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. All right. I'll see what I can do. But you keep your distance, you hear? That man's seen things. Don't go getting yourself tangled up in it. She watched him walk away, her thoughts a blur of questions she couldn't answer. What was he doing here? Why had he risked himself for her? There was something about the look in his eyes that didn't feel like the eyes of a stranger. It was the look of someone carrying a story no one had bothered to hear. Morning came slow, painting the desert sky in pale blues and soft orange. The town woke with a sense of unease, as if the shadows of the night still lingered. The bandits were gone, but everyone knew they could return. The saloon owner swore he recognized one of them from a wanted poster, part of a gang that had been robbing settlements from Tucson to Prescott. Silver Creek had simply been next. When the woman arrived with a small basket of bread and a jar of water, the sheriff raised an eyebrow. Told you not to get mixed in, he said. I just want to thank him properly, she replied. The sheriff sighed but didn't stop her. 5 minutes. Then you leave. She stepped inside, her heart beating faster than she expected. The jailhouse was dim, the air smelling faintly of dust and old iron. He sat where he had before, silent and still, though the cut on his shoulder looked worse in daylight. She placed the basket down near the bars. You should eat something, she said softly. He looked at the food, then back at her. You don't owe me that, I know, she said. But I want to. There was a pause, then a small nod of thanks. He reached for the bread, his movements careful, as if unsure whether to trust the gesture. They'll let you go soon, she said, though her voice wavered a little. Maybe, he replied quietly. Or maybe they need someone to blame, she frowned. You really think they'd do that after what you did? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the sunlight cut through the bars in thin golden lines. People see what they're taught to see. To them, I'm not a man. I'm a warning. His words settled heavily between them. She didn't know what to say, only that it hurt to hear him speak like that. That's not right, she whispered. He looked back at her then, and for a moment, she caught a flicker of something softer in his eyes. Sadness, maybe, or memory. Right, don't matter much out here. Before she could reply, the sheriff's boots thudded against the porch. Time's up, he said from the doorway. She hesitated, wanting to say more, but instead gathered her basket and nodded. I'll come back, she said quietly. You shouldn't, the Apache replied, but she did. Over the next few days, as the town repaired what was broken, she visited him in secret. Each time she brought a little more, some stew, bandages, even a blanket. He never asked, but he never refused either. Bit by bit, the silence between them turned into small fragments of conversation. She learned that he'd once lived far to the south, near the Sierra Madre, before soldiers drove his people north. He'd seen too much loss, yet spoke of it without bitterness, only acceptance. She told him about her father, who ran the general store, and about her brother, who'd gone east chasing work and never wrote back. Life in Silver Creek was hard, she said, but predictable, until that night. The more they talked, the more the distance between their worlds began to fade. Yet beneath it all lingered the same unease. The bandits hadn't been caught. Some believed they were part of a larger group hiding in the hills. The sheriff sent men to scout the trails, but they found nothing, just hoof prints leading toward the dry canyon. Then one evening, a stranger rode into town. He was tall, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. He went straight to the saloon and spoke quietly with the sheriff. Before long, whispers spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. The stranger was a bounty hunter. He claimed to know the men who attacked the town, and he had reason to believe the Apache had a connection to them. By the next morning, the mood had shifted again. People who had begun to doubt his guilt now avoided even speaking his name. The sheriff seemed uneasy but didn't argue when the bounty hunter demanded to question him. The woman watched from outside the jailhouse as the two men spoke. The bounty hunter's voice was sharp, the Apache's low and steady. Though she couldn't hear the words, she could see the tension in the air. When it was over, the bounty hunter stepped out, adjusting his coat. "He's hiding something," he said. "I can feel it," the sheriff frowned. "Or maybe you're just looking too hard to find what isn't there," the stranger smirked. "We'll see. That gang won't be far, and when they come back for what they left, you'll wish you'd listened." That night, the wind carried the smell of rain over the plains. The woman couldn't sleep. She found herself walking toward the jail again, lantern in hand. The streets were empty, the only sound the creak of a loose shutter and the rustle of dry grass. When she reached the door, she hesitated, listening. "You shouldn't be here," his voice came quietly from inside, as if he'd known she'd come. "I couldn't stay away," she admitted. "They're saying terrible things. That you led those men here." His tone didn't change. "Would you believe it if I did?" She shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "No, you saved me. That's all I need to know." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "They'll come back. Not for me, for something else." "You should be ready. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before he could answer, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of horses. The woman turned toward the sound, eyes wide. "That can't be." The Apache's gaze hardened. "It's them." And as the storm broke over the desert, the first flash of lightning revealed dark riders on the horizon, moving fast toward Silver Creek. The night that had started with fear was about to return, and this time, it would not end the same way. The storm rolled in heavy, swallowing the horizon as lightning split the sky. The thunder followed like the growl of something ancient, echoing across the open plains. Silver Creek braced for it, the wind, the rain, and whatever was coming with it. The townsfolk hurried to bar their doors, pulling their children inside. In the jailhouse, the Apache stood by the small window, his eyes fixed on the flickering flashes beyond the hills. He had seen storms like this before. Nature always warned before trouble, and this one felt more like an omen than weather. The woman rushed through the muddy street toward the sheriff's office, her lantern swinging wildly in her hand. "Sheriff!" she called, her voice barely carrying through the wind. "They're coming, riders from the south." The sheriff stepped out onto the porch, pulling his coat tight around him. "How many?" "6. Maybe more," she said, breathless. He said they'd come back." The sheriff glanced toward the jailhouse, jaw tightening. "Of course he did." He motioned to the deputy. "Wake the men, load up. We're not letting them take this town again." Within minutes, a small group of armed townsmen gathered near the saloon, their rifles gleaming wet in the stormlight. Fear hung over them like the dark clouds above, but desperation made them brave. Silver Creek had been built by people who had already lost too much to run again. Inside the cell, Silent Hawk pressed a hand against the cold bars. "You need to let me out," he said, calm but firm. The deputy scoffed. "You think we're gonna hand a gun to the one man everyone suspects?"
"You'll need more than your rifles," the Apache replied evenly.
"They know how you fight. They'll come through the canyon, not the road." The sheriff stepped in, hearing the last words. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I do," Silent Hawk said. The wind howled outside, shaking the walls. The sheriff hesitated, glancing toward the woman who had followed him in despite the rain. Her face was pale but determined. "He's telling the truth," she said. "You saw what happened last time. He fought to save us." The sheriff's jaw worked, torn between caution and instinct. Finally, he pulled out the ring of keys and unlocked the cell. "If you try anything, I'll put you down myself." The Apache nodded once. "Then we understand each other." He stepped out, retrieving his knife and a weathered rifle from the table. The woman caught his eye, relief flickering there before fear took its place again. The storm raged louder now, and the distant thunder began to blend with something else, the sound of hooves. The riders appeared out of the darkness like ghosts, their silhouettes lit by flashes of lightning. The townsmen opened fire, but the bandits split apart, circling the outskirts of town. Their leader rode ahead, a man in a black coat with a wide hat that shadowed his face. He shouted commands the rain nearly swallowed, and the attack began. Bullets shattered windows. Horses screamed. Smoke and thunder mixed until the night became chaos. Silent Hawk moved like he'd been born for this kind of storm. He darted between buildings, motioning for the townsmen to take cover. "They're driving you toward the saloon," he warned. "That's where they'll corner you." The sheriff barked orders, trying to hold a line, but the bandits were faster, using the dark to their advantage. One man fell beside the trough. Another stumbled into the mud, clutching his leg. The woman hid behind the store barrels, clutching a lantern that trembled in her hand. Every flash of light revealed something new, shadows darting, faces grim, the world alive with fear. Then she saw it, one of the bandits creeping toward the jailhouse from the back alley. She barely thought before running toward it, calling out, "Behind you!" The Apache turned just in time, spinning and firing. The shot cracked through the rain, dropping the man where he stood. The woman froze, gasping at what she'd just seen. He approached her, his face calm but eyes sharp. "You shouldn't be out here." "I couldn't stay inside," she said. "I couldn't just wait." He looked past her, toward the burning lanterns and the figures still moving through the dark. "Then stay close." Together they moved toward the main street where the fight raged fiercest. The sheriff was pinned near the saloon, trading fire with two riders crouched behind a wagon. Silent Hawk motioned to the woman to stay back, then slipped into the shadows. He climbed onto the wagon silently, dropped down behind one of the bandits and struck fast, knife flashing, swift and clean. The other turned too late, his shot going wide before the Apache disarmed him. The sheriff looked up, soaked and breathing hard. "Remind me not to doubt you again." Silent Hawk gave a small nod. "You'll get your chance." But the battle wasn't over. From the edge of town came another round of shots, louder, closer. The bounty hunter had returned, rifle in hand, shouting orders. Only now he wasn't aiming at the bandits, he was aiming at Silent Hawk. "There he is," he yelled. "The Apache's with them. I saw him signaling, he's leading them right to us." The sheriff spun, shouting back, "That's a lie!" But confusion spread fast in the chaos. Some of the townsmen turned their rifles towards Silent Hawk, uncertain who to believe. The bounty hunter fired a shot that grazed the wood beside the Apache's shoulder, splintering it. The woman screamed, running forward. "Stop! He's not one of them!" No one listened. The storm drowned her words, thunder rolling over everything. Silent Hawk ducked behind a barrel, scanning the field. He could see the truth now. Two of the bandits were moving behind the bounty hunter, using him as distraction to take the town's defense apart from within. He took aim and fired twice. Both men fell before they could reach the saloon. For a brief second, silence held. Then the sheriff saw it too. The bounty hunter lowered his rifle slowly, realization dawning too late. "You knew," he muttered. But the words were lost in the rain. The attack began to falter after that. The bandits, seeing their plan crumble, retreated into the storm. The few who stayed were either captured or dead by dawn. When the first light broke over the desert, Silver Creek was quiet again, though the peace was uneasy. Smoke curled from burned wood, and the streets were slick with rain and mud. The people emerged cautiously, counting their losses. 3 dead, 4 wounded, and too many questions left hanging. The bounty hunter packed his rifle and horse without saying much. He avoided the Apache's gaze but left one warning before riding out. They weren't after gold. They were after someone. "You best find out who before they come again." The sheriff watched him leave, his mind heavy. He turned to Silent Hawk. "You knew more than you said." The Apache didn't deny it. "They weren't strangers to me." That caught everyone's attention. The woman stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "You knew them?" "Once," he said, "before they turned to this life. We rode together long ago," the sheriff frowned. "Then why'd they come here?" Silent Hawk's eyes lifted to the horizon, where the last of the storm clouds were breaking apart. "Because one of them thinks I owe him something." No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the soft dripping from the eaves and the tired shifting of horses. The sheriff rubbed his temples. "You planning to tell me what that means?" "Not yet," the Apache said. The woman looked at him, searching his face for truth. She saw pain there, deep old pain, but not guilt. "You saved us twice," she said quietly. "Whatever you're hiding, it can't be worse than what those men would have done." He didn't answer. He just walked toward his horse, tightening the saddle straps. The sheriff didn't stop him this time. "You're leaving?" she asked. He paused. "For now. They'll come again, and when they do, I need to be ready." "Then let us help you," she said. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've done enough." But even as he rode out of Silver Creek, the woman knew it wasn't the end. She could feel it in the air, in the silence that followed his departure. The town was safe for now, but the real danger was still out there, waiting in the hills, watching. Days turned to weeks. Life in Silver Creek slowly returned to its rhythm. Repairs, trade, and the cautious laughter that tried to fill the empty spaces. But the peace never settled completely. The sheriff kept extra men posted at night. The woman often found herself staring at the horizon, wondering if she'd see the Apache's silhouette return. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the dust turned gold, a rider appeared again. For a moment her heart lifted, but it wasn't him. It was a messenger, young and out of breath. He handed the sheriff a folded note, sealed with a mark burned into the paper, the symbol of a hawk's claw. The sheriff unfolded it slowly, his face darkening as he read. "What is it?" the woman asked. He handed it to her without a word. The message was brief, written in a strong, steady hand. "They know where I am. Tell her to stay inside when the moon turns red." The woman's pulse quickened. She looked up at the sky already deepening into dusk. Somewhere beyond those hills he was facing what he'd tried to leave behind, and whatever it was coming closer to Silver Creek, and this time, the fight wouldn't be for survival, it would be for redemption. The moon rose over the desert like a pale ghost, washing Silver Creek in silver light. The town slept uneasily, its people unaware of the storm creeping toward them once more. The message had spread quietly among the few who knew, those who had read the Apache's warning. When the moon turns red, stay inside. No one knew what it meant exactly, but everyone could feel something strange in the air, a stillness before something heavy. The woman sat by the window of her small room above the general store, watching the horizon. The world looked calm, too calm. Even the coyotes had gone silent. On the table beside her lay the folded note, worn from how many times she had read it. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the hawk's mark again. She hadn't seen him in nearly a month. Every day since, she had wondered where he'd gone, what battles he was fighting, what ghosts were chasing him. Down the street, the sheriff lit a lantern in his office, staring out into the night. He didn't believe in omens or red moons, but he trusted the Apache's instincts. "He's not the kind to waste words," he muttered to himself. His deputy yawned beside him, feet up on the desk. "You really think they're coming back?" The sheriff didn't answer right away. He took a long look at the empty road stretching south. "I think they never left," he said quietly. "They've been watching, waiting for him to show again." And he was right. Miles from town, under the shadow of the dry canyon, firelight flickered between the rocks. 5 riders sat gathered, their faces half hidden by the glow. Their leader, tall, scarred, with a dark bandana tied around his arm, watched the horizon with a steady, burning stare. His name was known among the border towns, whispered with fear. He had once been a soldier, then an outlaw, now something worse. "He's coming," he said to the others. He sent a message to warn them, which means he's close. He always was too noble for his own good. One of the younger men spat into the dirt. "What do we do when he shows?" The leader smirked, his eyes cold. "We take what we came for. Then we finish what we started." The wind carried their voices into the distance, through the dry brush and over the silent ridges. Somewhere out there, Silent Hawk rode alone, following their tracks with the patience of a hunter. His face was hard, his eyes fixed on the faint light far ahead. The trail had been long, winding through canyons and across old riverbeds, but he knew where it led, back to Silver Creek. Back to the one place he had wanted to keep, untouched by the blood that followed him. He stopped near the edge of a bluff and looked down at the town lights flickering faintly in the distance. A heavy ache settled in his chest, not from exhaustion but from the weight of knowing what was coming. He had once called these men brothers. They had fought beside him, shared fire and hunger until greed and violence had torn them apart. Now they were coming for revenge and something else. In his saddlebag lay a small leather pouch tied shut with sinew. Inside it was a carved piece of stone, a token stolen years ago from a sacred Apache site. The bandits had taken it during a raid, believing it worth gold. But it was never gold they'd carried, it was a curse. They had mocked it once, but not anymore. Every man who'd held it too long had met an ugly end. The leader, Garth, once known by another name, wanted it back, certain it was the key to his luck. Silent Hawk knew better. Some things weren't meant to be stolen. He tightened the strap of his saddle and whispered to his horse, "Time to finish it." By the time he reached Silver Creek, the town was nearly dark. Only the faint glow of lamps burned in a few windows. The sheriff was waiting by the well, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said. "Neither did I," the Apache replied quietly. The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the hills. "You expecting company?" "They're already here," Silent Hawk said. "They'll wait for the moon to turn," the sheriff frowned. "You keep saying that, what does it mean?" The Apache looked up at the sky, where the pale moon was beginning to blur with a shadow. "The earth will cover the moon tonight. It'll turn red before dawn. They'll use the darkness to strike." The sheriff's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then we'll be ready." They moved quickly through the streets, waking the few men they trusted, preparing the town's defenses. The woman, hearing the commotion, came down the stairs clutching a lantern. When she saw him standing there, tired, dust-covered, but alive, her breath caught. "You came back," she said softly. He looked at her with that same calm, steady gaze she remembered. "I said I would." There was so much she wanted to say, but the words tangled in her chest. "You shouldn't have come alone," she finally whispered. "I wasn't alone," he said, nodding toward the shadows. "You were waiting." The sheriff cleared his throat. "You two can talk after this is over. Right now, we've got to keep people alive." As the hours passed, the tension grew. The streets were quiet except for the faint rustle of wind and the creak of old signs swaying. Every shadow looked alive, every sound suspicious. The townsmen hid behind barrels and fences, rifles ready. The woman stayed inside the store, though she kept peeking through the window, her heart pounding with each passing minute. Then it happened. The moon, once bright and silver, began to darken. Slowly, a reddish hue crept across its face until it hung above the desert like a blood-stained coin. The light it cast was strange, soft, eerie, turning the world into a quiet dream of crimson and shadow. That was when the first shot came. A window shattered on the far side of town. Then another. The bandits moved like ghosts through the alleys, their horses silent, their coats blending into the night. The sheriff shouted for his men to hold their fire, but it was too late. Chaos erupted in every direction. Silent Hawk ran toward the edge of town, where he knew they'd come from. He caught sight of movement near the livery stable, 2 men creeping along the fence line. He moved fast, taking cover behind a wagon. When one of them turned, he struck, quick and silent, knocking him to the ground. The other raised his rifle, but the Apache fired first. Back near the saloon, the sheriff and his men fought to keep the bandits from breaking through. The sound of gunfire echoed off the buildings, mixing with the wind and the distant thunder. The woman, trapped inside the store, crouched low behind the counter as glass shattered above her head. Through it all, one thought burned in her mind. Where is he? Then she saw him again through the broken window. He was running toward the well in the center of town, where the leader of the bandits now stood, his coat billowing like a shadow against the red moonlight. "Garth!" Silent Hawk called out. His voice cut through the chaos. The outlaw turned, a grin spreading across his scarred face. "So it's true. You did come back." "I came to end it," the Apache said, his rifle steady. Garth laughed, lifting his own weapon. "End it? You think you can wash away what we started? You turned on your own, Hawk. You left us to die." "You killed for greed," he said. "You killed for nothing." The standoff held for what felt like forever, 2 men bound by history and hate. The wind whipped dust through the street, and somewhere behind them the church bell clanged wildly in the wind. The woman watched from the doorway, her breath shallow. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to hide, but she couldn't look away. "You can't run from what you are," Garth said, his voice low, taunting. "You'll always be one of us." Silent Hawk's eyes narrowed. "Not tonight." Garth fired first. The bullet missed by inches, striking the post beside the well. The Apache dropped to one knee and fired back, the shot grazing Garth's arm. He cursed, ducking behind the stone trough. The street erupted in gunfire again, both sides drawn into the deadly dance. The sheriff shouted orders, trying to rally his men, but the outlaws kept pressing. One tossed a burning torch through a window, and flames began licking up the side of the saloon. The air filled with the scent of smoke and the crackle of fire. Through it all, Silent Hawk kept his eyes on Garth. The two circled each other, every step heavy with memory. They had once fought side by side. Now they moved like predators waiting for the other to make a mistake. "Give me the stone," Garth snarled. "You think you can keep it from me?" Silent Hawk didn't answer. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out the leather pouch and tossed it onto the dirt between them. "It's not gold. It's death." Garth hesitated, eyes flicking to it. Lies. But as he bent to pick it up, the earth seemed to tremble beneath them. A strange sound, low, deep, almost like a growl of wind through a canyon, rose in the air. The horses reared and screamed. The firelight flickered wildly, and for a moment even the fighting stopped. The woman clutched the doorframe, her heart hammering. The red moon glowed brighter, bleeding across the sky. Silent Hawk stepped closer, his voice calm but fierce. "You took what wasn't yours. Now the land remembers." Garth backed away, shaking his head. "You're bluffing." But the ground cracked again, a sharp rumble splitting the silence. The sheriff shouted for everyone to fall back, but the noise drowned his voice. The world seemed to shift, the storm, the fire, the red moon, all merging into one unbearable tension that hung in the air. Seconds away from breaking, Silent Hawk stood firm, eyes locked on Garth. The woman could barely breathe. Then, with one final flash of lightning across the blood-colored sky, everything went still. The red moon hovered above, silent and watching. The next heartbeat would decide everything. The flash of lightning faded, and for a long breath the town of Silver Creek held perfectly still. The red glow of the moon hovered like a wound in the sky, painting everything in its pale crimson light. Smoke curled up from the burning saloon, and the wind carried the crackle of fire and the smell of dust. Silent Hawk stood in the middle of the street, his rifle lowered slightly, eyes fixed on Garth, who still clutched the leather pouch in his trembling hand. The earth's trembling slowed, then stopped. A strange quietness followed, the kind that falls after the heart of a storm. Everyone waited. Townsfolk, outlaws, even the sheriff. No one dared to move. Garth's face twisted in disbelief as he opened the pouch and pulled out the small stone. It glowed faintly in the red light, its carved symbols seeming to shift and breathe. "You said it was death," Garth muttered, his voice shaky but mocking. "But all I see is superstition." Silent Hawk stepped closer, his voice steady and low. "You don't understand because you never listened. That stone wasn't meant to be taken. It belonged to the sacred grounds of my people. You took it and the land has never forgiven you." Garth's hand trembled, the stone pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Then, almost as if answering Silent Hawk's words, a sudden gust swept through the street, snuffing out torches and scattering dust like ashes. Garth stumbled back, eyes wide, and the stone slipped from his fingers. It hit the ground and cracked. The glow inside it dimmed, then vanished completely. In that moment, everything seemed to exhale. The red moon began to fade back to silver, and the tension that had gripped the town slowly loosened. The outlaws who were still standing looked at their leader, saw fear in his eyes, and began to drop their weapons one by one. The sheriff stepped forward, rifle still in hand. "It's over," he said, but Garth didn't answer. He stared down at the shattered stone, then at Silent Hawk. "You always thought you were better than us," he whispered bitterly. "You think breaking that curse makes you clean?" Silent Hawk shook his head. "There's no clean in what we've done, but there's a way to stop it from spreading." For a long moment, Garth looked as though he might fight again. His hand twitched near his belt, but something inside him seemed to break instead. He dropped to his knees, his shoulders sagging. The fight, the anger, the years of vengeance, all of it drained away into the dust. The sheriff's men moved in, cuffing the remaining outlaws while the townspeople began to emerge cautiously from their hiding places. The woman ran toward Silent Hawk, her heart pounding with relief and fear all at once. She stopped a few feet away, not sure whether to reach for him or just look. "It's over?" she asked softly. He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "For now," he said. She looked around at the burning saloon, the scattered bodies, the broken windows. "You saved them," she said. He shook his head slowly. "They saved themselves. I just kept a promise." The sheriff joined them, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Silent Hawk nodded. "This town needs peace. I don't bring that." The woman's eyes filled with quiet sadness. You could, she said. If you stayed. He looked at her with a faint, weary smile. Peace doesn't come from staying. It comes from knowing when to walk away. She didn't try to stop him. She knew his kind of pain couldn't be healed by soft words or familiar faces. Still, as he turned to walk away, she called after him. Where will you go? He paused at the edge of the street and looked back over his shoulder. Home, he said simply. To the land where this began. By dawn, the fires had been put out and the prisoners were locked up. The sheriff's men gathered what weapons they could, and the townsfolk started sweeping the streets. The red moon had given way to a pale blue sky, and the air smelled of new rain somewhere far off. The woman stood outside the general store, watching the last trail of dust fade into the horizon where Silent Hawk had disappeared. She felt both lighter and lonelier, as if something sacred had passed through the town and taken a piece of her with it. Days turned into weeks, and Silver Creek began to heal. The broken windows were replaced, the burned saloon rebuilt, and the fear that had gripped the townspeople slowly turned into stories they whispered at night. Some said the Apache had brought a curse. Others said he'd saved them from it. But those who had seen the look in his eyes knew the truth. It wasn't about curses or stones. It was about redemption. Far beyond the town, Silent Hawk rode through the canyon where it had all begun. The wind brushed through the dry grass, carrying faint echoes of voices long gone. He stopped by the old sacred site, a circle of stones half buried in the earth. The sun was rising now, its light soft and golden over the red rocks. He dismounted, took the cracked pieces of the stone from his pouch and placed them gently at the center of the circle. He knelt there for a long time, head bowed, whispering words in his native tongue. The air was still, almost reverent. When he finally stood, a calmness had settled over his face, the first true peace he had felt in years. He looked toward the horizon and smiled faintly. The burden he had carried was no longer his alone. The land had taken it back. Back in Silver Creek, life carried on. The sheriff grew older but kept his post, always keeping a lantern burning in his office window at night, a silent reminder of the night the town almost fell. The woman took over the store completely and became one of the town's anchors. Every once in a while she'd look toward the southern hills, wondering if he was still out there. Sometimes when the moon rose full and silver, she thought she could hear the faint echo of hoofbeats beyond the ridge. She'd smile to herself, knowing that wherever Silent Hawk was, he hadn't forgotten. And in that quiet truth lay the real ending, not in the gunfire or the curses or even the redemption, but in the simple understanding that peace doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from facing it, accepting it, and letting it go. The legend of Silent Hawk spread across the territories in the years that followed. Travelers passing through Silver Creek would ask about the night the sky turned red and the outlaw curse was broken. Some swore the Apache spirit still roamed the desert, protecting those who respected the land. Others believed he had become one with it, a guardian watching over the plains and rivers he once called home. The people of Silver Creek didn't argue either way. They had their memories, and that was enough. The town thrived again, stronger and wiser than before. The land around it bloomed after the rains, as if the earth itself had forgiven, and on quiet nights, when the wind moved gently through the canyon and the stars shimmered bright over the desert, a single hawk could sometimes be seen circling above the cliffs, silent, graceful, free. The woman would stand by her window then, her hand resting lightly on the sill, and whisper into the night, "Safe travels, Hawk." Somewhere far beyond the horizon, carried by the wind, a faint echo always seemed to answer back. And though the world kept turning and the years kept passing, the story of Silent Hawk and the Red Moon lived on, spoken in hushed tones by campfires and in the soft songs of travelers. It became more than a story of vengeance and survival. It became a story of balance, forgiveness, and the power of returning what was never meant to be taken. In the end, Silver Creek learned something it would never forget. Sometimes the truest kind of justice is not in punishment, but in understanding. The desert, once scarred by violence, breathed again with quiet grace. And under the endless sky, where wind met stone and memory met peace, the spirit of Silent Hawk finally found rest.